We're going to be starting off with my talk, which is going to be talking about the freshwater insects of the Ballinderry River catchment, particularly looking at mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. This is a preliminary study that started in late summer and funded by DERA in collaboration with Ballinderry Rivers Trust. And I'd like to acknowledge Andrew Kenny and Lauren Galately in the audience who've helped me with sorting and identifying specimens, as well as in the field. It's not progressing. Okay. So starting off with any survey, one needs to see what's known about the fauna of the area one's looking at. And so this is a summary of the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies in Ireland and Britain. And for mayflies, I've got Northern Ireland as well, stoneflies, the same number. Interestingly, the CEDAR database produced more stoneflies than are actually currently recorded for the whole of Ireland. And checking up, I've removed synonyms and reduced it to 24, and there's still much to be sorted out with the databases. But it's just a start to see that caddisflies are pretty abundant. There's 156 species in Ireland. So we were looking in this area next to this Cookstown area of the Ballinderry Rivers Trust, zooming in. Those are the sites that we were surveying. And we first of all start by looking at mayflies. So this was the National Biodiversity Data Centre's records. So it looks as though they're pretty well covered, but in fact, quite a lot of the records are relatively old and outdated, and things haven't been updated in Northern Ireland much for a while. Looking at the National Biodiversity Network's data, we see what looks again like a good coverage, but those are family levels. And if you look at the species level, this is what you see. So indeed, rather far scantier records than one would hope for. These are the distribution records from CEDAR. So you can see different records and somewhat scattered as well. Then there's iRecord and iNaturalist. So we see there are a number of sources of data, which none of them seem to concur. So this is me trying to get my head around what's actually happening here. And I can see that a lot of work needs to be done. So I was fortunate to get funding from DERA last year to look in the Ballinderry River. This is Mark Horton, who's been collaborating with us. He's looking at freshwater pearl mussels there. And there we have Andrew and Lauren imaged in the field doing some field work. In any survey of rivers, it's important to look for sites that have as much diversity of habitat as possible to actually get a good, accurate assessment of what's present. So here's a lovely site with trailing waterweed of various kinds, as well as smaller gravelly areas, bigger stones, larger rocks if possible, riparian vegetation, places for the adults to hide and for breeding. So that's a lovely site. Not everyone has such good habitat. Back in the lab, Andrew doing some identifications, and going back now to actually focus in on what we found, just reminding you of the sites, found that these two sites of interest were the highest in terms of diversity of the groups that we looked at. Just again, bearing in mind this was just at the end of summer, so these two sites. The yellow dots are the sites that are actually on the Ballinderry itself, whereas the others are tributaries. So Cane Daisy is a glen just in the north, so the foothill of Esperance, and not too surprising that that was high diversity. And well, Wellbrook Mill Bridge, which is the second site, has a really, really good habitat. And so I think that's possibly why those two had the best sites, best records. You can see several sites have no stoneflies recorded at all. So it's just interesting to see what's actually happening, and much more work needs to be done in analyzing this. I've put in an outlier, Glen Arm, which I meant to show you on my earlier distribution map. This is a river in the Antrim coast, and I've included it because it just shows what a really beautiful, pristine river can actually have in terms of diversity compared to these other rivers. Now, geology plays a role in it. Historic things such as flax and so on in the past has influenced some of the diversity, but also I must point out that this was slightly earlier in the season, so it's not 100% comparable, But I put it in because I felt it was really interesting just to see this little river and what it actually could produce. Looking at the Irish red list, which you've heard a bit about already, zooming in on a few, we found that Beatus atropatinus and Ephemeroptera notata, we found specimens of each. These are both considered to be endangered. So if we look here, we had one record on, this is a map from CEDAR. We had one record in Northern Ireland, and we've produced several more records for that. If one looks at the red list map for all Ireland, we see that, in fact, no records had ever actually been listed. So actually interesting to see that there's far more abundance of these than previously recorded. Ephemeroptera notata, again, you can see our records in yellow. And comparing that to the red list atlas, you can see that prior to 1990, one specimen was recorded in a similar area and nothing since. The heptageneid Rephlogenus semicolorata, quite a widespread species, again, new records. So I'm just giving you a few highlights and examples. I'm not going to show you everything we found, but just to draw attention to some of the new records that we're finding and the importance of them. This is Ectionurus torrentis, considered data deficient, and it just shows a little bit of work produces much bigger distribution. Same with Ectionurus venosus, Heptagenea sulphura, Ceratella ignita, and Cephalurus lacustris. So that's a little overview of just a few of the mayflies, showing some of them are pretty rare. I mean, we only found one site of this. So still a lot to be done, but this is a small area that we've been looking at. And even last weekend, I was up at the Mourns and found records that weren't previously mapped. So it's a constant bit of work that just shows more recording is desperately needed. The same situation with stoneflies. Again, the National Biodiversity Datasets map, the National Biodiversity Network UK map. Again, this is the species level records as opposed to the family. So that's the family records, but that's the species records. And it's the species records that we need, because water quality monitoring is done at family level, which is fine and well for getting an index of change in the river quality, but not any much good for biodiversity studies. And what we are doing are biodiversity studies. So looking at the stonefly red list and zooming in there, we see that Capnia atria was vulnerable, and we found that at one site. And if one looks at the recent map by McAdam, Feely, and Doe, in fact, it seems to indicate that it wasn't even recorded in Northern Ireland, pretty much. So a new record for that. Protonemora mayeri, on the other hand, is a very widespread species, recently photographed, caught and photographed. So you can see we're finding things that are both common and relatively rare. So this Diura bicordata, again, seems to be the first record for at least Northern Ireland and not recorded on the map. Caddisflies, we see a good distribution on this, but one needs to go back and check every grid, and I couldn't actually see that information. I couldn't access it. I have to ask permission to get that. So I still need to do that. Most of the records on the National Biodiversity Centre were family records. There were so many by family that we couldn't actually remove all the family ones to get species. Just homing in again on a few of the species. So this is one of the Glossosomatidae, found a plain arm only so far. Tenodis unicolor, found that, adding that to our sites in Ballinderry. These are the caddisfly maps from James O'Connor, who's got an atlas, 2020 atlas. And this is a polycenthropodid. So you can see the yellow dots represent our new additions. This is Hydropsyche contubernalis, only found from our Glen Arm visit. And here we have Drusus annulatus, which I've got two different maps there. One is O'Connor's 2020 map, the other is from the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and you can just see our three additional species records there. So it's quite widespread, less threatened. So this pilot study has shown really that there's a great under-recording of mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies in Northern Ireland. And, you know, I like to look at things in the context of the whole Ireland. This is something that keeps coming up, and I'm very much want to work in collaboration with colleagues in the Republic. But we are finding many new records of species, even just recently with some random samples from Carr Glen. We found another caddisfly, which we believe to be actually the first record in the whole of Ireland, limnophilid. So it shows that under recording and just a little bit of work is producing some interesting results. Just looking at what was available on the maps, we definitely need further aggregation to see what's available to actually get proper overview of temporal and spatial changes. And we need to do a lot more survey work, and we need funding to do that. So I hope that this will be forthcoming. So our future plans, we want to investigate the invertebrate fauna of the Irish freshwater ecosystems, including every possible kind of ecosystem that we can find, focusing on major geological zones, and look for rare or under-recorded or even unknown species in areas that are less well studied. And we thought that if we look at suitable habitats that are known for species in Britain, we can perhaps predict where we might find these in Ireland and go and look for them. So we want to look at the diversity distributions and ecological requirements of these three keystone freshwater groups with collaborative partnerships, and we're going to be training citizens too to get more involved with studying these taxa. And we've got a training course next week in Ballinderry with Ballinderry Rivers, actually looking at mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies in collaboration with Buglife. We're going to be consolidating all the records on CEDA. I know there's a lot of caddis data that's been put onto CEDA recently, which hasn't yet been released. And we want to contribute also to new species pages for mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies, and to all Ireland studies. So the species pages that we want to model are going to be, we want to put them on the Habitats website, which our museum hosts. And a lovely example is the recently updated ground beetle of Ireland site, which Roy has just been working on in collaboration with Damien and with Bernard Picton to actually update this. It's a site that's been around for a while, but new photographs have been added, new information has been added. The maps are now interactive, so you can actually click on each map and then on each site and get information about it. So this is something we would like to actually copy in terms of bringing in mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies onto a system like that. And currently with this, we're contributing to the UK Barcode of Life program, sending specimens that we've been collecting for DNA work to the United Kingdom, to the Natural History Museum. So we basically have been collaborating with Ben Price in London. So I'd just like to acknowledge the following people and thank you for listening.
So as I sort of Valerie, it's microphone, so can you hear me okay? You can. So thank you, Helen, for that. So I'll start with a few questions for myself. It was quite a unique opportunity for us to record so many sites along the same river catchment area. Do you think that's something that's quite useful scientifically?
Yes, I think it's very important to actually continue doing that and to look at it over multiple seasons, because we only got the tail end of summer. I'm sure we missed quite a lot of the earlier emergence. We already see stoneflies are flying now, and we really should be out there right now collecting. We will do some collecting next week during our training course, but we need to actually focus on keeping going with that, but also expanding the areas and looking at areas that are under threat. And I'm very interested in looking at high altitude things as well for rare species and things that might be threatened by climate change, by temperature changing.
Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, this is going to inspire another dark hole to go down with these things. So how important is studying the habitat
Standing water has its own unique combination. I have yet to really look much in standing water in Ireland. My background is from Africa. I found in terms of Africa, very few, no stoneflies in standing water, but I'm not sure here. I doubt, probably not, but certainly caddisflies and mayflies are well adapted. You get your own unique groups within those ecosystems. So I'm interested in looking at every ecosystem possible and finding what we, go in with an open mind and see what we can find.
Yeah, just to respond to that comment, but learning from Britain, one of the big differences between Ireland is that we do have large areas of standing water in the lowlands. Most of the standing water in Britain, but those lowland lakes have big more shores, and you will actually find stuff quite common on the shores of. So if you were
Yes.
to Ireland,
Yeah.
or even not many. What life is in it is important because it is great water. So,
That makes sense, yeah.
so you actually will find stuff like that. Small lakes. Did you did you collect the water vehicles when you were?
Yeah, we collected everything. So excellent. Yeah, we promised to deliver on mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies for the funding, but we collected everything because I believe it's important.
I did expect you to say.
Excellent. I saw there was a comment from Hugh Feely online about checking the Capnia atria identification, and we're going to actually check that this coming week with Craig McAdam, just to be sure we have actually identified it correctly, because we're still, Andrew and I are both learning to identify Irish species. I'm familiar with African ones, but I also admit that I'm pretty busy with all sorts of other things and don't get nearly enough time to look under the microscope too. But yeah. Right.
We have a lot of very, very small rivers, probably more than other places in the rest. And some of the streams are very and not places where recorders will.
I think you're correct that things like that are understudied, and that's why I've been pottering around some of the little streams in the Belfast Hills last year, and this where we just found we actually had this new caddisfly record. And we looked carefully, and I'm pretty sure we're correct that it is a new record for Ireland. But getting permission to go onto land is quite tricky, and not knowing whose land it is, I haven't quite figured out how to manage that yet. It's a bit daunting, in fact. So if I do get, I've been hoping to get funding for a 5-year project. Still actually in discussion with Sarah about aspects of that. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but those are the sort of habitats I want to be looking at as well, not just the big rivers, but many of the smaller streams that I'm sure have got interesting bits and pieces. I went up with Roy to the Sperrins last year at one point, and one little river that we looked at was full of really interesting things too. So, yeah, good point. Okay, thank you.